Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Professor Hanni Juusola, representing the University of Helsinki and Middle Eastern Studies here. You are almost welcome to this seminar entitled The Challenge of ISIS Seminar and Panel Discussion. One of the important tasks of our discipline is to take up questions that are important at the moment. And I guess all of you agree that ISIS or ISIL or IS or whatsoever, Daesh is one such question right now. This seminar is organized in cooperation with us and then Iraqi Cultural Forum.
So welcome on our behalf as well.
Okay, and in terms of our program today, we have first welcome words by Excellencies Dr. Saad Jawad Qindil, Ambassador of the Republic of Iraq, and Dr. Sayyid Rasul Musawi, Ambassador of the Islamic Republic of Iraq. And after that, we have three speeches giving a general introduction to our topic. We have a senior advisor from CMI, Ilkka Uusitalo, who has a long experience in Iraq. And then we have researcher Man Al-Jumaili from Sweden, and assistant researcher Juha Saarinen from Finnish National Defense University. And Juha is also a PhD candidate at our department. And after that, starting at 3 p.m. we have a panel discussion where we have, in addition to Man Al-Jumaili and Juha Saarinen, Muhassad Rami Al-Mudafar.
Muhassad is
over there. He's a political scientist and activist, but unfortunately, Field Officer Joel Alberg from Folke Bernadotte couldn't come here today. Ilkka Uusitalo unfortunately needs to go to the airport, and therefore he cannot participate in our panel. And after the panel, we still have plenty of time for discussion and comments. I'm sure that there will be differing opinions and comments from the audience as well. These are highly important for this seminar. And we try to end by 4:30. Okay, thank you very much once again, and Mr. Ambassador.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I would like first, good afternoon, in fact. I would like first to thank organizers of this seminar, particularly the Haidar Al-Hulu and the association, the Cultural Association of Iraqi Finnish, and also Professor Hanni Juusola, University of Helsinki, for organizing such important seminar to inform the Finnish public opinion about who ISIS is and the scope of threat of ISIS. It's a very important seminar. I welcome this activities. We encourage such activities to continue to inform the world opinion, not just Finnish opinion, about the threat of ISIS. ISIS is posing a threat to all over the world. Of course, the biggest threat is to Islam, mainly by misinforming the Muslims and using Islam as a banner to progress their deviated ideas, which is deplored by everybody, by all Muslim authorities, by world public opinion, by humanity. Such acts of terrorism, when you see their actions, cannot be related whatsoever to the noble religion of Islam. The main victims of ISIS are Muslims. Their arena of activities is in the Islamic world, and therefore the biggest victims of ISIS are Muslims and the Muslims' world. Their threat, not just by killing, by stealing, by denying the freedom of people, but it is a big threat of spreading the wrong idea about what Islam is. What they try to do in Iraq is to use the banner of religion to spread sectarian differences between Sunnis and Shias, so that they thrive on this threat. Before that, the sister organization, Al-Qaeda, who have very similar principle, very similar basis of operation. They tried to do that in 2005 in Iraq, but they failed, mainly because of the religious leadership in Iraq, but in particular represented by Ayatollah Sistani in the holy city of Najaf, who has issued a verdict for all his followers not to respond to any threat of killings. And he has got very noble saying that even if they kill half of the Shia, 50% of the Shia, who are the majority in Iraq, then the Shia must not respond against the Sunnis, so that they fulfill their target of making sectarian problems between Sunnis and Shias, and that is where they come and they try to show themselves as a protector of one sect against the other sect. In this way, Al-Qaeda has been finished in Iraq. They had no basis to work. Then come the ISIS, who is an offshoot of Qaeda, but there's a little bit more sophisticated. Al-Qaeda propose themselves as an organization, whereas the ISIS propose themselves as a state. And Al-Qaeda sometimes they have got some principles to follow. For example, it is not known that Al-Qaeda killed children, but ISIS does. No, they have got the principle that the means justify the aims, and therefore they do everything, and their main tool of achieving their target is to spread terrorism, is to make people fear them, and out of fear people follow them. And they show that they have got followers. They don't have any followers, but people fear them because of the way they spread their threat in Iraq. Not only they are a threat in Iraq, they are a threat to the region. In Iraq, of course, they have controlled some cities in Iraq. They have spread killing, stealing. They destroyed archaeological and historical important places. They have degraded women. They have put control on the resources, some resources of Iraq, like oil. They have stolen banks to finance their operation, and they did so much of these act of terrorism, but that is what they did in Iraq, and also they did similar things in Syria. They started in Syria, and now they moved in Iraq, and Iraq is not going to be their final destination, as they have changed their name from ISIS to IS, Islamic State, which means they assume their state, the authority of their state is global, is all over the world. So they intend to move from Iraq to neighboring countries first, and then so on. So therefore, all neighboring countries of Iraq also are under threat of ISIS: Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iran, and even Turkey, although they are now making use of Turkish lands and Turkish facilities to enter and infiltrate from Turkey into Syria. Used to use Syria also to infiltrate into Iraq, but it is well known that, okay, maybe today they are making use of such Turkish facilities, but tomorrow they will turn against Turkey. They will turn against all those countries, and they will not stop there. They declared that they will move to North Africa, and they want eventually to impose their authority on all Muslim countries. In fact, they are a threat to the world, not just regional or not just Muslim countries. They are a threat to the world because they have got people recruited from 80 countries in the world, believe it or not. And there's no certain statistics about their numbers, but there are certain statistics about the countries they are recruiting from. The minimum I heard are 40 countries. The maximum I had 80 countries. Almost all European countries, they have got members of ISIS in them. It's been public opinion that at least 40 from Finland have been recruited as members of ISIS. Of course, those 40 are those who have traveled to Iraq or Syria and took part in terrorist activities. This does not include any sleeping cells who might be in any European country, Finland or others, who might act when they are instructed to. In this way, ISIS is a threat to the world. It's a virus that has to be eliminated and terminated, and it would never be terminated without cooperation of the world. In this way, when they use such logistics, such financial support, such human support from all over the world, the world community need to put hands together and do something to rid the world from this evil organization or evil people. We have heard that the United States have called for a coalition of some countries to fight Daesh, but of course that is on its own not enough, because what we need to fight Daesh is not just a military activities. It has to be on military front, on political front, and economic front. So we need a total and complete global cooperation to help get rid of Daesh. What we are doing in Iraq, we are acting on all three fronts. There are lots of activities that the Iraqi security forces are acting in the field, on the land, to fight those terrorists. And of course, the resources that we have in this way is not enough, and we do need the support of the world to achieve the target of fighting Daesh. We are also acting on the political front, which is trying to consolidate the unity of all components of Iraqi society, consolidate the unity of all political parties in Iraq, to have a united stand against ISIS, so that they do not make use of any sectarian difference that their sister organization Al-Qaeda has tried and failed, and they will also fail to achieve that. And we have just formed a new government in Iraq, which include all political parties in the parliament. We don't have an opposition in our parliament because we are in such critical and special circumstances, and therefore everybody need to participate in this government to have such a united political front against ISIS. And also there are cooperation on the human front. This is very serious matter for Iraq. We do need support. We have 2 million refugees who has fled from cities and part of Iraqi land which is controlled by ISIS, and they don't have now any place to live on, proper place. They have fled their houses, they have fled their jobs, and they are living in the open, and therefore lots of humanitarian relief is required to help those people to live at least on a temporary basis until they have the opportunity to return to their homeland. This is another front that we are working on, which we need the world support. And I think with this kind of seminar, we'll try to inform such public opinion of the need that the world need to put their hands together to fight this common threat to everybody. Thank you for listening.
Thank you,
We have something saying that management on the stage. So I was preparing myself in another kind of talking and speaking. Let me use this piano as a tribune, with your permission. And thank you, Mr. Duasula, Mr. Al-Hello, for your kind invitation. Thank you, Excellencies. I will try to say some specific points about a paper that I have prepared for this seminar. I know that there is no time because I understand that they asked me to have some remarks, opening remarks. So I will try to summarize what I want to say, and tonight or tomorrow I will publish in my Facebook if anyone wants to have my paper. In recent days, it is easy to talk about ISIS, Islamic States, or Daesh, or any another names, rather than 2 or 3 years ago. For what reason? Because 2 or 3 years ago, many countries gather in the umbrella in the name of Friends of Syria, and everybody knows that who supported Jabhat al-Nusrat, Daesh, and another terrorist group. Now, today they are saying against ISIS or Daesh. I believe that it is necessary to try to understand rather than to focus on one group or the other group on a root of the terrorism, root of the extremism, root of the groups like Al-Qaeda, Daesh, Boko Haram, and many, many other things. 10 years ago, or more than 10 years or 15 years ago, there was an unknown group in the name of Al-Qaeda. They was saying that we will defeat Al-Qaeda, we will kill bin Laden, and now it's claiming that the world is more safe because bin Laden is not alive, bin Laden were killed, Al-Qaeda is weakened, and what's happening? Al-Qaeda is not in Middle East, but from Afghanistan, Pakistan to Iraq, from Iraq to Syria, from Syria to Libya, from Libya to Somalia, and many, and we heard that in the name, different, many names, like Boko Haram and many things. What is this? I am saying that without understanding the root of this phenomena, it is impossible to tackle with Daesh, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, and others. It is only saying about the killing of the leader of the Daesh. Okay, today, some years ago, Al-Mus'ab al-Zarqawi were killed. Now another person is there. If this person is killed, another people will come on the leader. So what I want to say that there are many analyses. Here is a university. It's better we have an academical approach to understanding what's happening. I believe that there are many different approaches to understand this problem. There is a textual approach. One idea says that the root of terrorism based on the Quranic lessons, Quranic idea, and the Muslim are going to the terrorists because of their textual lessons. I am saying that no, because very openly in Quran, I read a very specific ayah sharifah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا لِتَكُونَ شُهَدَاءَ عَلَى النَّاسِ وَيَكُونَ الرَّسُولُ عَلَيْكُمْ. Saying that, thus we appointed you as a midmost nation that you might be witness to the people and that the messenger might be a witness to you. All of the surah of Quran started by Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the compassionate and the merciful. How is it possible? Like this text can be a root of the extremists. I believe that there are many different code and fact that never the text of Quran and the text of the Islamic lessons can be a root for extremism and radicalism. Why I am emphasizing about extremism? I believe that terrorists based on extremists and radical thinking. If we try to demolish and take it out the extremist idea, I do believe that we have no terrorist groups. And there are another idea, they are saying that there are many difficulties in this situational approach. It says that the economic factor, political, dictatorship, and many different elements in the Islamic country is the root of radicalism thinking, and it depends to the basic root for terrorism. In my paper, I also have some comment about this idea. I do believe that there are many different factors in Islamic force, but it does not mean that it goes to extremist idea. I believe that the main problem is the different strategy, and the root of terrorism based on the clash of strategies rather than clash of civilization. We have no clash of civilization. We have the cultures, the civilization, they will never fight each other. They will have never fight each other or clash with each other. But we have a clash of different strategies. Yes, in our region, in Middle East, we have different strategies. I think that the root of the groups like Daesh, Boko Haram, Jabhat al-Nusra, and many other groups based on different strategies. Let me conclude, and as I mentioned that today I will try to publish in my Facebook this article, this paper. I am saying that in our region, unfortunately, many strategies are, there are a revival, there are a clash, and until that time that there will no find for a solution for the main problem of our region, occupation, sanction, terrorism, and many regional and historical problems like Palestinian issues in Iraq, in Syria. Without this, it is impossible to tackle with Daesh. I am saying that how we can accept that. Let me only read the conclusion of my paper. As I mentioned, what is going on has nothing to do with values, political system, and economic situation. During the past decades, almost all global and regional powers have tried to increase their influence in the Middle East for a strategic reason. The strategic importance of the region has increased during the past few years, and it will continue to increase during the coming decade. The oil and gas resources of the region are core of the strategic interest. In this assumption, IS or others can be playing as a playing card for global or regional powers, and they play their role, and when their role finished, another group will come to the stage. Now there are many talks about big coalition about countries to fight Islamic State. But the core of this coalition made by the countries which had big role in the creation of the IS. If we are against this crystal fact, it means we don't want to resolve the problem. And if we have honest in finding solution, It is impossible without changing false strategies which implemented in last decades and recent years in the region by global powers and their ally in the region. The last possible and regional choice for global power are especially for US is to use their regional and global influence positively to solve regional problems like Palestinian, Iraqi, and Afghanistan conflict, and support a regional security framework comprising all regional countries. In this framework, to find a just solution for Iranian nuclear dispute based on win-win result will improve the West image in the Muslim world and paves the way for decreasing huge costs of overextension of military forces. At the same time, it will contribute to expansion of democracy and region. Thank you very much.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen. I'm approaching this issue from the experience, especially that I had for more than 3 years in Baghdad, when I was there as a head of the EU delegation from 2006-2009, and of course then followed the developments there very closely. And I have to say that when ISIS started its advance in Iraq, in a way I got this kind of a déjà vu feeling, because as has been already mentioned here by previous speakers, there was previously Al-Qaeda actively working in the very same areas which now are controlled largely by ISIS. Of course, Al-Qaeda, as also has been already mentioned by Iraqi ambassador, was then expelled from their positions there when the Sunni tribes turned against them through the so-called awakening councils, also supported by, at that time, by the US surge, 2007-2008. It's now almost exactly 5 years since I left Baghdad. When I was there and leaving from there, there was a certain optimism in the air, and the situation was relatively good. Violence was very clearly decreasing at that time from the peak levels it reached during 2007-2008. Even economy started improving and doing relatively well as oil production was growing. Oil and gas count more than 90% of the revenue of the state, so they are in a key situation. Even international oil companies at that time started to come back and signed their first contracts for oil exploration. Prime Minister Maliki, who came to power in 2006, had consolidated his position, because there were a lot of rumors earlier about his possible removal, some kind of a coup, and so on. But he consolidated his position, especially after 2008, when he confronted Muqtada al-Sadr and his militia in southern Iraq. At that time, the country was already preparing also for the departure of the US troops, and there was clearly confident feeling that the Iraqi security forces could assume full responsibilities of country's security after they have left. Now, of course, one has to then ask what went wrong, because all these optimistic feelings did not materialize in the end. How it is possible that ISIS could enter Iraq and take into control such a huge areas? I would say there are, of course, no one reason to this. There are many internal reasons, but also, which is important to remember, plenty of external factors and actors who influenced and contributed to this current situation. If you look at the internal factors first, since 2003, Iraq was in a new situation because Shias had gained control of the country through the removal of Saddam Hussein, and Shias needed to learn actually how to govern the country and how to be really in the majority. And at the same time, Sunnis had to get used to it, that they were a minority in the country and that they were not anymore dictating how the country was run. Of course, this created tensions within the country, and it is very well used, these differences, to have the success it had. Without the support of the local Sunni tribes, ISIS could not have achieved what it did. At that time, when ISIS started coming to and this campaign, one could say that ISIS and the Sunni tribes had like common interests and a common enemy, which personalized in Prime Minister Maliki, and that allowed them to work together. I frankly don't think that that interest, common interest, will prevail very long. Another reason, of course, in this situation was that Prime Minister Maliki was unable or unwilling to accommodate and integrate Sunnis to the new administration and political system. He also could not settle the differences with the Kurdish region, especially internally disputed boundaries and also the management of oil and gas resources. However, one should not put all the blame on Prime Minister Maliki. Many external actors worked to undermine his government during these years. In Iraq, historically, external actors have had a great influence in developments. That has unfortunately not changed very much. Saddam Hussein was removed by the US forces in 2003, and in the process they also totally destroyed Iraq's administration, security forces and economy. This meant that one had to restart building the state from zero, and this was not an easy task and would not have been an easy task for anyone, also taking into account the fragile security situation. One could say that from outside, one neighbor, Iran, I think was satisfied to see Saddam Hussein removed. They could not have done them themselves. Saudi Arabia has all along fueled dissent among the Sunni tribes. They never accepted Prime Minister Maliki, blaming him to be Iran's agent. Actually, at the time of this crisis, it was interesting to know that even the US Department at one point on their website defended Maliki and explained why he cannot be called Iran's agent. In the north, Turkey, in a way, encouraged Kurdistan region in its dispute on oil and gas management and in its stand with the central government or the government in Baghdad. But perhaps the most important external factor which gave ISIS its strength was actually the Syrian crisis. ISIS was relatively dormant in Iraq before the Syrian crisis started and gave totally new life and opportunities to an organization like ISIS. With the Syrian crisis, there were huge amounts of financial resources which flowed to various armed groups fighting President Assad from Saudi Arabia and the Gulf countries. There was also political acceptance. Anyone against President Assad seemed to be acceptable without questions at some point. Turkey allowed unhindered access for foreign fighters through Turkey to join ISIS in Syria. Of course, also Syrian President Assad contributed to the strengthening of ISIS. There was collaboration between Assad regime and ISIS. Regime was counting ISIS to fight other groups, and they also needed to prove their claim that they're fighting a terrorist group. But in the end, they were even buying oil from ISIS-controlled oil fields. As we can see from this, ISIS actually has had many godfathers. Only now, these godfathers are slowly starting to realize that they may have created a monster which is uncontrollable, and they have got really worried. ISIS has managed to merge Syrian and Iraqi crises, so it is not just an Iraqi issue. It has become a truly regional problem, and that's why also solution cannot be found only inside Iraq. This question of creating monsters, unfortunately, also is an old story which has happened. Saddam Hussein at some point was supported by the West. Taliban was supported, and even, as I said, Bin Laden by CAI money to fight the Russians, and so on and so forth. We seem to be repeating this mistake and not learning from the history, but creating these situations ourselves. Of course, the question now is that what should be done, what could be done? It seems from today's situation that the military advancement of ISIS has been at least contained or stopped. But of course, they have not been beaten, far from it. They have perhaps suffered some setbacks, but whether these prove to be permanent remains still to be seen. To my mind, and I think Iraqi ambassador was also referring to it, the key to defeating ISIS actually lies within the region, and in this case within Iraq, and how the need to the previous government. What kind of economic, political, social policies they will adopt to make a difference and better integrating the various components of the Iraqi society, especially the Sunnis, but also finding solutions to the disputes with the Kurds. This will be the key, as Ambassador was calling for all the parties to unite, to fight for this menace. And it depends on this, that there will be new kind of policies by this new government. I'm sure if there will be this kind of new, more integrating policies, the Sunni tribes would push back ISIS the same way as they did with Al-Qaeda a few years back. They will need, and there is, military support, but airstrikes alone, whether US or by others, they will not be sufficient. So the key will be really the policies which will be carried out by the government. However, as I already mentioned, the key issue here and made the difference between the situation with Al-Qaeda is that ISIS is not just in Iraq, but also very much in Syria, and cannot be sure whether they will turn out up also in some other country in the region if it's not very quickly contained. This means that there is a need to find also new policies in solving the Syrian crisis. I would argue that this means also more emphasis on diplomatic solution in Syria, not just regime change. The Syrian policies by the West, by many others, have been mainly concentrating on how to remove Assad from power, not really of looking for a diplomatic solution. And I think the emphasis has to change. And this also, in the end, may mean, despite all reluctance by those who have requested President Assad to go and refuse to discuss with his regime, that they may have to swallow their pride and at one time find a way to work somehow with the regime if they really want to be tackling also ISIS in Syria, and also to finding a more permanent solution of defeating and pushing them back. Thank you very much.
I'm very happy today to meet intellectual people in this university, and thank you for the organizer. Actually, I'm going to tackle this problem from different viewpoints which the gentleman talked about. And also, I want to ask you, ladies and gentlemen, why you are here? Why are you coming here? What do you want? You have to understand your role in this international problem, which I'm going to summarize my research, which is about 20 pages, and they want me to talk just 10 to 15 minutes. So I will rely to your intelligence to get all the parts of my research, and Mr. Elka explain the regional problem and how we solve it. But I'm going to tackle it from other point. Actually, my research is going to be 3 points. How did ISIS mean Islamic State in Iraq and Sham? Sham means Syria, Jordan, Lebanon. This is the first objectives they want to establish Islamic states. And Daesh, which they mentioned Daesh, this is an Arabic word for ISIS. So please understand these topics. So the first point, how did ISIS become a major problem, and how did they become a very strong organization? And who created ISIS? What's the history behind ISIS? Now, also I'm going to mention what's happening in the world. Why this trend of violence? And suddenly President Obama wake up in the morning and say, oh my God, ISIS, what's happening? And then President of France, then Germany, Britain, in 1 week, they make issues, seminars, conferences, trips all over the world. Oh my God, ISIS, what's happening? Why the world is so concerned about ISIS now? The second topic, it's how we're going to confront ISIS in the short term. And the third point, how we're going to defeat the vision of ISIS in the whole world. And this is, it means how we going to defeat this vision. Regarding the first point, I would like to go back to the Second World War. After the Second World War, America emerged as a superpower, and the economy of Europe was, I don't say completely, but I can say it's destroyed in some way or another, and America issued a martial law to build Europe economy to face the Soviet Union. So we had two superpowers facing the world, and they have a major conflict in the world. That's one issue. And we had the Cold War starting after the Second War, and it's really a major problem of the world. And in the other one, the parallel to this conflict, after the Second World War, there is a trend and vision of making the world as a peaceful, global international community by creating the United Nations, Amnesty International, Human Rights, Court of Justice, International Court of Justice, even the Monetary Fund. Some trends wanted us to live in peaceful world rather in conflict. But unfortunately, this conflict which I am talking about between superpowers, they ignore, or they couldn't help the third world country economically, politically, and living in peace. By saying that, which this is a very summarize of a whole research, by saying that the people of the third world, you have to understand, they feel desperate, disappointed. They become a people who have no vision, and they want revenge. I would like to say I am from Iraq, but I have studied in Leeds and Lancaster University, and I have done my thesis in the management studies comparing the third world and the Western world. So I would like you to know why I am speaking like that, because I live in Western for many years, but I also feel how the third world people feel about America and feel about the West. So now our world is moving into another direction. So that's why we need your attention. Now, in 1980s or 70s, Henry Kissinger made his dissertation. Henry Kissinger is one of the American politicians who he was also a foreign minister at that time, who issued his dissertation to say the world must be led by one superpower, is the United States, and we have to destroy the Soviet economy, and they did. But the impact, what's the impact? The impact is of the whole world. They didn't care about the third world countries. Now, the other factor, I'm jumping. The other factor is the sectarian factor, which been emerged in the last 20 years or 30 years between Sunni and Shi'i. And now we are facing a conflict between Iran and Saudi Arabia. In this conflict, I don't mean who support who, I'm sure you know what's happening, but there are other factors, other people who use this sectarian conflict in order to destroy certain groups and certain regimes in the area. And also the impact was very bad on our people. In these circumstances, the people want somebody to save them. They don't like even all those regimes. They don't want America. They don't want any savior. The Qaeda emerged in the beginning from CIA, America to face the Soviet intervention in Afghanistan, and they make bin Laden one of the heroes against the communists. But unfortunately, the Qaeda become a danger to the world when they have done 11 September explosion to the WTC. The WTC destroyed the vision of the international community who wants to live in peaceful coexistence. They make a division between, oh God, Muslim terrorist on the West. And this is not true. And we need to understand how the Muslims feel. There are majority of Muslims, they want to live as you live, with you in a peaceful coexistence. Now, how are we going to defeat ISIS? Okay, we are going to help or support or defend Mr. Obama's policy by airstrike, by militarize Iraq and the Kurds in the north. And also there are so many points Mr. Ilka mentioned. But is that enough? He also talked about dry the resources. He also talked about we have to know how many fighters, their resources, their strength, where it's come from. We have to cut these things. Is that enough? No, I'm not talking about the short term. Okay, this is good for the time being. But now I'm talking about a very, very important points which I would like you to listen to that. First of all, why ISIS become an international problem? You have to know there are so many sleeping cells in Finland, in Sweden, in America, in Germany, all over the world. They are waiting for the signal to make the world like a hell. So this is our role to become ready to face this danger. And we have to destroy this danger now, not in the future. How are we going to do it? First of all, we need to tell America to change their policy and to tell the third world country that yes, America would like to help the other countries rather than just using them, rather than making conflict between other groups, as the people in the third world country understand that, or they have this vision. So this is one of the points. The other thing, that we have a problem between Iran and America about the nuclear weapon. We are hoping and we need to make a good dialogue between America and Iran to finish this problem in order to get this conflict going away from the region. We need to have a dialogue between Iran and Saudi Arabia to live in a harmony between Sunni and Shia. Must help the Muslim group who are moderate, who wants to live in peace with all over the world, in order those Muslim group can convince the ISIS or the youth that this is not a real Islam. This is not a right Islam which ISIS talk about. This is on people who are reaction from the policy of the West and who are telling the people wrong, who interpret the Quran wrongly. We have to give them the real Islamic vision, Islamic translation of Quran, because everybody translates Quran in different way. Also, we need to infiltrate those groups by cooperating with the Sunni and Shia group, to infiltrate them, because they are living among us, in order to really understand, or let them understand how we can live peacefully. You are in the West, you have to change, or you have to put a lobby to make the general international policy change, and we, with the help of you, can we change the vision of the youth. At the same time, the other point, that a new vision to the youth must be established by let them build the world rather than destroy the world, and also open opportunity for jobs and a new scheme to live in a very peaceful international community. This is briefly what I wanted to talk about, and there are so many points we need to discuss how we cooperate to create our world in a harmony and peaceful process. Thank you very much. Thank you to the
mentioned. I'm Juha Saarinen. I work as an assistant researcher at the Finnish National Defense University, and I'm also a PhD student here at the university. And what I want to talk about is my understanding of what I see the Islamic State to be as a group, as an actor, and where they are currently. And maybe, if there's enough time, I see I have about 15-20 minutes, so I try to keep my comments short. But I want to finish with a kind of almost a prediction where we are going to be in, say, 6 months or 12 months' time. But if there are 4 things that you should remember about this presentation, I'd like to say that when we're talking about the Islamic State as an actor, first of all, it is a violent non-state actor, which means it is going to affect change through violent methods. It focuses on terrorism and guerrilla warfare currently, although it practices a wide scale of political violence, from ethnic cleansing to using political violence as part of their organized crime activities. It's also a transnational actor. It emphasizes a pan-Islamist identity, meaning Muslims everywhere are saying that they should practice Islam in a similar manner. Of course, their interpretation of what Islam is mainly ahistorical and decontextualized, and this is an identity or an interpretation of Islam that's not really found anywhere naturally occurring outside the jihadi circles. As was mentioned previously, the IS has fighters from over 80 countries, and currently you'd be hard-pressed to find a European country, especially a bigger European country, that hasn't had its fighters join the IS. Thirdly, it's a global jihadist actor, which means it shares Al-Qaeda's ideology, even though it's not a part of their network anymore. It aims to achieve its goals mainly through violence, similarly as Al-Qaeda does. And lastly, it's a modern and political actor, meaning its aims are political rather than religious, and its methods are modern. One good example of this is how they utilize social media for their propaganda. One issue I take with some comments that have been mentioned earlier is that Islamic State is not Islamic, and that's something that Obama mentioned in his speech earlier this month or late last month. I think the Islamic State cannot be separated from Islam. It certainly sees itself as part of the Islamic tradition, but it represents a radical interpretation of traditional religious doctrines and Islamic history. It's a new form of interpreting very central doctrines, to say Salafism, and it's a very specific kind of political Islamic ideology. And these interpretations are decontextualized from what we can say is the Sunni orthodoxy, traditional presentations of or concepts of jihad or takfir, which they utilize, but they completely reinvent what their content is. And these reinterpretations are done to suit their own ideology, their own project, and their strategic context. So what is the driving factor here is using Islam and Islamic concepts to justify political violence done in the name of a thoroughly modern political ideology. Islamic State has been known with many names. I don't want to go too much into history. I'll try to keep it in post-2009, but it is contrary to what is often believed and written in Finnish media. It's a group that was first formed in Western Afghanistan in 1999 with the name of monotheism and jihad. Its goal was to overthrow the monarchical regime in Jordan. It was, of course, founded by a group of Jordanian jihadists. Mainly, the main leader of theirs was Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, which later on became a huge name among global jihadis during the most violent phase of the conflict in Iraq, post-2003. Of course, in 2004, it became formally a part of Al-Qaeda's network, and it changed its name to Al-Qaeda in Iraq, or Al-Qaeda in the Land of Two Rivers, which is the more accurate translation. In 2006, shortly after losing Abu Musab al-Zarqawi in an attack, it rebranded itself as the Shura Council of the Mujahideen, which later on became the Islamic State of Iraq in 2006 as well. In 2013, it became involved in the Syrian conflict formally, and in 2014, when it established the caliphate, now it's known simply as the Islamic State. And what is the Islamic State? Well, as I mentioned earlier, it's a part of, well, it believes similarly to Al-Qaeda in kind of the concept of global jihad. It sees itself as the vanguard, which is, for those who study political violence and history thereof, it's a concept that is taken from socialism, Marxism-Leninism. It sees itself as a group of actors that is supposed to polarize the wider population through very symbolic and important acts of violence. And it sees itself as the vanguard of the community of believers, and its idea of what the community of believers is very different from what I'd say moderate or mainstream Muslims believe. It aims to create a global political entity for this global religious community, as we've seen, especially after the 1970s. Islam is a religion that is found everywhere in the world, and it is especially troublesome for Islamists and jihadis to try to establish some kind of a political entity that is based on a territory. And Al-Qaeda is one of the first groups to kind of come up with a theory of how to go about to create a political entity for all Muslims. Their idea is to create a political entity or a caliphate that essentially consists of the globe. So it's a global caliphate. What is a bit different about the Islamic State is its idea of what this community of believers should consist of. It is rather purist. It aims to purge the community from apostates, meaning those within Islam who do not believe in Islam similarly as they do, and other religions as well. If you follow the news in Syria and to a larger extent in Iraq for the past 2 months, you can see that the Islamic State, despite its propaganda saying that the caliphate is for everyone, they have a very specific idea of who should be allowed to live in its caliphate. It are essentially those people who essentially practice Islam in a similar manner that they want Islam to be practiced, and no one else. It accepts no challenges to its authority, whether we talk about those individuals who are suffering under the Islamic State's rule, or those armed groups that it is currently cooperating with in Syria and Iraq. Now, my background is mainly in the use of political violence. That's a topic that I've researched for the past 5-6 years. And so I want to really focus on the Islamic State strategy, how they see their wider picture and what drives their use of political violence. Now we can see that Syria and Iraq are a clear strategic priority. They use political violence mainly in the context, geographical context of Syria and Iraq, and in the ideological context of their caliphate that was pronounced in I think late June. Their kind of strategic imperative at the moment is to hold and conquer more land for the caliphate, but also destabilize surrounding regions through terrorism and other forms of political violence. And again, use of sectarian violence and massacres has been particularly visible in their propaganda. But also, which is a little bit different from Islamic State's predecessors, is also that they try to govern the territory that they have governed. They are trying to provide essential services, subsidies for foodstuffs, etc., etc. But again, it kind of still remains to be seen in how effective they are in trying to govern their territory. And the ideological issue with this is that essentially they're supposed to govern their territory, but at the same time they want to purge the individuals who live under their rule. Of course, as we've seen in the Middle East for the past 3 or 4 years at least, they also try to create and exploit sectarian tensions. This is something that's been very visible in Syria, it's been very visible in Iraq, it's been visible in Lebanon. And this has some ideological and religious connotations, but we can go to those in the panel. And interestingly, we've at least all heard about the decapitation videos or the ritual executions of a couple of journalists from the US, British aid worker, Kurdish Peshmerga members, Lebanese members of armed forces. It seems that they may have a strategic imperative to provoke external interventions as to create more chaos in the environment that they operate in, particularly in the case of the US. Now, this is not necessarily sure. It's more speculation than anything else, and we're talking about a violent non-state actor, so we don't really have an insight to what they talk about behind closed doors. Another question or another interpretation is that these videos have more of a tactical purpose to energize, inspire, and excite their sympathizers and supporters through, especially through social media, but also through traditional media, which has been put a lot of effort into covering and analyzing these videos. And it seems the Islamic State, apart from most of other jihadi groups, it's been particularly successful or skillful rather in addressing Western audiences. And this is something that may be due to the fact that so many Western radicalized Sunni Muslims have joined them previously, and this they bring with them kind of know-how and the discourse of Western pop culture that they are using in their own propaganda. ISIS as an organization, it's largely self-funded these days. We don't have a lot of information, but there have been quite a few documents confiscated that show a light on where ISIS money comes from. Well, firstly, currently it's selling oil, getting taxes from various businesses and individuals under the territories they govern. Of course, organized crime has been something that they've been particularly good at for the past, I'd say at least 6 or 7 years, even before they became ISIS, let alone the Islamic State. There are parts of the Sunni areas in Iraq where Al-Qaeda, as it was still known, never really went away, and the regime in Baghdad never really took control. Mosul is one good example. They weren't really focused on terrorist activities, but they were a source of income for them still. Of course, then there are kidnappings of Western hostages and then trading them for ransom. Unfortunately, there are quite a few countries that pay ransom and pay quite heavily to liberate their citizens, which goes to funding terrorism and funding the Islamic State. It is increasingly a hybrid organization, and what do I mean by this? It's part of a terrorist network, which means it has a cell structure, it has a lot of flexibility where it operates, where it doesn't have that much manpower in different parts of Syria and Iraq and elsewhere. You mentioned sleeper cells. I'm not entirely convinced it's a huge problem in countries where jihadi activity or the jihadi scene is quite as fresh as Finland. But it certainly does have its supporters, and it may have clandestine cells in various parts of the Middle East, especially those countries that have seen a lot of foreign fighters travel to Syria and Iraq. It's also a part guerrilla army. It currently uses most of its manpower in fighting irregular asymmetric warfare against various opposition groups in Syria and various militias and government forces in Iraq. And as I mentioned earlier, they're also they have parts of a proto-state. They try to govern the territory. This takes resources, this takes manpower, and it's something that they are at least dabbling with, although the effectiveness of this is, not clear, to say the least. So where did we come from here? I'm not entirely sure if you remember, but Obama mentioned in a speech during the re-election campaign when somebody asked about the jihadis who are kind of organizing in Syria and Iraq under the black banner of the jihadi flag. Obama mentioned that, you know, this is nothing to worry about. We have Al-Qaeda on the ropes, and this is the junior varsity team of terrorism, meaning it's the B team, whereas Al-Qaeda was the A team, and it was in the brink of a strategic defeat at the moment. Well, currently, ISIS is the topic of many a seminar. It's something that weighs on the mind of Western and Middle Eastern policymakers, and it's something that is taken very seriously throughout the region and in the Western communities. ISI, or the Islamic State of Iraq, it was a fairly marginal group until 2011, and I say marginal in relation to what it is today. It never really went away. It just focused on the kind of activities that doesn't take that much manpower. Organized crime and terrorism are activities that you can relatively labor-free practice in areas where central government doesn't have that strong of a role. But it started to grow, I'd say, in Iraq after 2009. There were certain domestic developments that came into play. The then Prime Minister Maliki's increasing authoritarianism was an issue, corruption, unwillingness to integrate Sunni actors and Sunnis into the political system in any meaningful way, and in addition to that, integrate them in the armed and security forces, latter being particularly applicable to the Awakening Councils and the Salafist movement, which was supposed to be integrated into Iraqi armed forces and military so they could have a source of income. But Maliki later reneged on his promise, and they were left with very limited economic opportunities and a real sense of grievance that we can see playing out even today. Of course, in the context of Iraqi Sunni regions, there was also a lot of structural violence, a lot of instability, and predatory behavior from the part of Iraqi armed forces that really kind of added to the sense of grievance and sense of alienation from the political system, leading to widespread feelings of marginalization and victimhood among the Sunnis that was exploited by various parties. Jihadis was one of those parties, but there's also been ex-Baathists, those who belong to Saddam Hussein's regime and seek a return to the pre-2003 situation. Also various Sunni nationalists. Ideologically, they have this kind of idea of nationalism, but they may have different objectives. One from having an equal say in the political system to one saying that only Sunnis should be able to rule Iraq as it has been historically, in their view, being a Sunni state. But the most critical one, as Ilkka mentioned, was Syria's uprising turning into a civil war. Now, as I mentioned, ISIS became formally part of the conflict in April 2013, but it has had a role in the conflict since 2011. First, it helped Jabhat al-Nusra, or a group which was later named as Jabhat al-Nusra, to form in, I think it was from summer 2011 onwards. They provided the funds, provided the know-how, and they sent Jabhat al-Nusra to Syria in early 2012. Now, Jabhat al-Nusra, another name for it in the early days was the Islamic State of Iraq's Syria wing. And interestingly now, we see Jabhat al-Nusra and the Islamic State fighting. They're very hostile towards one another, but that's a consequence of, I'd say, rather power politics within the jihadi group rather than any kind of ideological disagreement. ISIS first wanted to go to Syria, well, a couple of months before the formal announcement, and they saw that since they helped Jabhat al-Nusra financially and organizationally, Jabhat al-Nusra was part of their organization. And when they gave this formal announcement that we're going to Syria now, they also mentioned that Jabhat al-Nusra now is part of our organization. And Jabhat al-Nusra said, well, this isn't particularly the case, and pledged their allegiance to Al-Qaeda central leadership, which prior to that had very little role in the conflict. Now, the entry of these jihadi actors were facilitated by a legacy of serious policy during the Iraq War, And we come time and time again to this kind of importance of the Iraq War 2003 to the jihadi movement, and we don't have that much time to go through it, but we can certainly return to it on the panel. But what is crucial is during those early years of the conflict, the Syrian regime developed an infrastructure that was designed to smuggle fighters from Syria to Iraq, first from Syria alone, and then from Syria and elsewhere in the region. And unfortunately, as often is the case, when you try to ride the jihadi tiger, as the saying goes, or when you try to sponsor the jihadis and get there to do your bidding, you fail, you lose control, and then you have to live with consequences. And in Syria's case, it was even prior to the conflict, it was an increase in jihadi and Islamist political violence in the country in, I think, 2007 through 2009. It's nothing compared to now, but there was a wave of political violence in the country then. And then we have Bashar al-Assad's strategy during the civil war that has been allowed to develop in Syria. You can see the unwillingness of the international community, or unwillingness, I think is a good term, or inability, rather, of the international community to prevent the humanitarian disaster in Syria is a major motivator for a lot of foreign fighters. Most of them join the Islamic State, but they are at least partly motivated by humanitarian reasons. And if we would have been able to effectively intervene earlier on during the conflict and kind of de-escalate it somehow, this might have been avoided, although this is wild speculation. Well, currently, I'll try to be very, very quick. The Islamic State is the most visible global jihadist actor. It went from junior varsity to a winning team. And winning team, I mean, they have been the one most visible jihadi actor, and it has been able to really give Al-Qaeda its money's worth in terms of competition for the leadership in the global jihadi movement, which consists of various movements that share the ideology of global jihad, but aren't necessarily organizationally linked to either the Islamic State or Al-Qaeda Central. We can see that after the declaration of the caliphate, they have been given a boost, although the caliphate itself was critically, to say the least, received among Islamist circles, jihadist circles, and other Muslim thinkers. Although it has inspired and I'd say excited the radicalized youth and the rank and file of certain jihadi groups. And this has been a major, major problem when you have jihadis going from places like Yemen or Algeria, from Tunisia, to be trained and further radicalized in Syria. And then when they return, they go from having a problem in Syria and Iraq to having a problem that affects the entire region and maybe even the Western countries. And this is something that there should be a very balanced, I think, response to that requires international community to have a very central role. And in terms of where we are going to be, say, next couple of months, 6 months, a year, an interesting question is, how will the Islamic State fare? Jihadis have had very, I'd say, specific problems that plague them, like the locusts. They often fail in governance. They try to govern their territory. The jihadis have been particularly bad at it. Of course, part of this is that when they go to a region and start to control territory, they might be unwilling or unable to provide services, and then they come to a region and say, well, you're practicing Islam wrong. And you don't need to be a rocket scientist to know that's going to rub some people the wrong way. Can the Islamic State pull together its coalition in Iraq? Hopefully not. Iraq now has a new prime minister, and although it's way too early to say what their policies are going to be, at least now there's hope of more effective policies in Iraq towards the Sunni population. An interesting question is also, can they avoid the insurgency resource curse? We've heard a lot about the Islamic State being the richest jihadi actor or a violent non-state actor. Well, the problem is when you have money, opportunists come knocking. There might be opportunists joining the movement in hopes for making a quick buck, and they might even use political violence in a more free way, maybe use more political violence target groups that shouldn't be targeted, and that can be a problem for jihadists in the future. And then, of course, how will the intervention go? And this is something that we can really get into during the panel, and I think this is a place to stop as any. Thank you very much.
Here's a basic thing to know about ISIS. That group that says large part of Iraq and Syria. It has only few thousands of fighters. That nearly is not enough to hold a series of large cities. Analyst David Kilcullen says that ISIS has done it because they are not alone. And David is a former advisor to the US military in Iraq. I will let you, gentlemen, to think about this, what he means by they are not alone. And I would like to ask Abbas Bahmanpour, please, if you can come here, about the root and ideology of ISIS. Could you please tell us what me and you as a Muslim, we cannot do so brutality, killing people. Where they get these thoughts from? Yes.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies.
Do you want to take the microphone?
Use the microphone. Yeah. Don't think it's working. Is it working? Okay. Yes, the ideology of ISIS. I'm Abbas Bahmanpour, by the way. I'm the Imam of the Shia mosque here in Helsinki, in Helsinki. Well, I'm not an expert, as we have here, on Middle Eastern studies or politics, so I'm not going to talk about the political ideologies of ISIS, etc. Rather, I'm a student of Islamic studies myself, and I'll be talking about the Islamic sort of perspective to ISIS. Before I start my discussion in that very briefly, I was told 5 minutes, so I just want to address an issue that was brought up by Juha Saarinen in his speech that I have to say that I disagree with. So he said that we should emphatically agree with the usage of the moniker Islamic State for the group ISIS. However, I myself find that I agree more with the open letter written by the leading scholars, Muslim scholars in Britain and Muslim organizations in Britain a few days ago to Prime Minister David Cameron, where they asked him that in the future, whenever he refers to ISIS, he would not use the term Islamic State, rather he should use the term un-Islamic State, because they are far from being an Islamic State. Rather, they're not even a state really, as we already heard in the lecture. They are at best a proto-state, so neither Islamic nor a state. So I too find myself agreeing with this sentiment that we should not refer to ISIS as an Islamic State. We should not give them the legitimacy with this reference of giving the legitimacy of being an Islamic organization and being a state, because in reality they are neither. If tomorrow some crazy cult was established and the leader began to call himself Intergalactic Emperor, we shouldn't call him Intergalactic Emperor. We should call him whatever he is. So I think an Islamic State is a good secondary option. So I think that's what I'm going to be referring to them as, UIS or an Islamic State. As to the theological roots of ISIS, again I have to find myself, unfortunately, agreeing with Juha Saarinen respectfully. Of course I agree with many of the things you said. That it is not ISIS, the ideology of ISIS or UIS is not something that is new. It is not something that is recent. In fact, there are many narrations that have been reported from the Holy Prophet of Islam, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whereby he warned the Muslims that there will come a group after me, and this group, they will be حدثاء الأسنان سفهاء الأحلام. They will be literally translated young of their teeth. They will have newly have found their teeth, or as in English we would say, green behind the ears. So very young people, very sort of immature understanding of issues. But Sufaha al-Ahlam, they have very grandiose, foolish dreams. And these people, they will claim to speak for very beautiful things. They will talk about very nice things, very appealing things. They will talk about bringing back real Islam, and, or like that they are representing real Islam, and that how they are trying to abide by the Quran, and they are trying to practice by the religion of God, etc. They will say very flowery, beautiful, appealing things. However, faith has not gone further than their throats. The Prophet says that their faith has not gone further than their throats. What does he mean? He means that in reality these are just words. True faith comes from the heart. These people, what they speak about Islam and what they claim to say for Islam is not true Islam. And true Islam has not entered into the hearts. They do not represent what Muslims represent, so to speak. In another hadith he says that they are يُحْسِنُونَ الْقِيلُ وَيَسِعُونَ الْفِعْلِ, that they have beautiful words, but they have ugly actions. They recite the Quran, but the Quran, again he says, does not go further than their throats. Your prayers are nothing compared to their prayers. He's telling his followers. Your fasting is nothing compared to their fasting. Your recitation is nothing compared to their recitation. So when you look at it, on the apparent, on the outside, they're very practicing Muslims. They seem very appealing. To someone who wants to be a good Muslim, etc., they might find these people very appealing, in fact. But the Prophet says that Islam escapes them as the arrow penetrates the target. So a good arrow, what does it do when you shoot it at the target? It penetrates the target, it goes through it. So he says that Islam...
That they say they penetrate Islam as an arrow.
Yes, yes. Well, my translation is on the fly here, but so that they sort of, that Islam is not truly within them, rather that it has, it is something that is only passing by them. So they don't have the real faith. And then the Prophet ends the lecture and the sort of speech to his followers by saying that the most important sign of these people is that they will kill other Muslims. That this is their most important sign. That the way you can recognize. So it's this sort of radical ideology. It appeals to people who are naive, have a very low understanding of Islam, are not well grounded in the foundations of the religion, and therefore they are misled by this sort of flowery talk and by these sort of claims and wondrous, fascinating claims that, for example, UIS does, that we're going to establish a global Islamic caliphate from Spain to Indonesia, and these sort of completely wild-eyed fantasies that they tell to people. Then who believes in these? It's unfortunately, as we've seen, many of the young, naive people from all over the world who are sort of attracted to these ideologies. And of course, people who are ruthless or bloodthirsty who are also attracted to these sort of ideologies. However, the clear message that I wanted to portray today is that by no means, even though the claim is of an Islamic state and a caliphate, etc., by no means should we be mistaken to believe that these are in fact representing Islam. In no way do they represent Islam, and in fact it is the duty incumbent upon all Muslims to oppose such ideologies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hadith by Prophet Muhammad criticizing this action and this group of terrorists. So please, who is this? Who's the founder of this group, and what David means by they are not alone?
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, Professor Hanri Yusula, and I hope that I'm pronouncing your name right, correct? And also Mr. Haydar Elu. I would like, first of all, to thank you very much for giving me this chance in order to speak with you here today and share with you some of the views about ISIS, their origins, their beliefs, their targets, and as well, I would like to share an attempt with you on how to deal with them as well in the future. Let me start by rephrasing what Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi said on the 29th of June. He said that he's calling or he's operating in order for Muslims to achieve honor and dignity. Well, it struck us, it might struck us, who doesn't want to achieve honor and dignity, or who doesn't want to live in honor and dignity. And it was a good thing that you brought up the citation of the Prophet Muhammad, where he says that their speech doesn't really apply to their actions. So we address some critique to IS. I would like to prefer to call it IS, as they call themselves, the Islamic State. We address some critique to them as they are being inhumane, as using these scripts and texts in order to execute some actions that we consider inhumane. I mean, in our civil sense, as they don't coincide with the human rights. But I would dare to say that maybe unfortunately we can see some Islamic states, there are maybe plenty of them who sometimes use the same punishments, and they kind of interpret the same texts from the Quran. And yeah, we sometimes object to that, but it's still being used. I'm not trying to say that these states are terrorist states, but still, the script is being interpreted by different scholars of Islam, and they are being used in a vicious and rigorous way, and in order to hurt people. But still, we condemn ISIS or IS, and we struggle, or we try to struggle in order to stop their expansion. And that's a... Yes, exactly. Who's their finder? Well, maybe if we should go back early in history, my dear fellow, he spoke about the Khawarij. And today, even by plenty of Sunni Muslims, they are still called al-Khawarij. So there is an old interpretation, but my colleague here said, or spoke about the spread or the beginning from Afghanistan, or specifically in Khorasan, because as they believe that there is a phrase by Prophet Muhammad who says, or in that phrase, it's supposed that the Prophet Muhammad said that the black veins or the black flags will appear from Khorasan and they will start taking over. And they use that phrase actually in their own propaganda. You can Google that, or you can look it up in YouTube. There is a video still. Unfortunately, my colleague today, Joel Alberry, whom I assisted, and we have covered many videos on YouTube, trying to listen to their speeches and trying to see their goals and what they really like to achieve. And they are kind of sincere and open with what they would like to achieve. So it's not a hidden agenda. So we know that. And the most important thing is for us to adopt or to create or find a strategy in order to spread, or in order to stop the spreading of that cancer. And many ideas were brought up here before, including military actions. And we heard the previous attempt to stop Al-Qaeda by the awakening program, or the Majalis al-Sahwa awakening councils. And we found that even though it was successful for a while, that project, when it was stopped, it led to the actual reawakening of Al-Qaeda, which then transferred into IS.
good to stop here, so please,
Yes.
I would like to move the speech to Juha. Juha, could you please tell us, you said that in your speech, we can't be separated, they can't be separated from Islam, as you heard from Abbas Mahmoud, from the Excellency's ambassador. They all say that they are not Islam, and even in its speech, the ambassador of Iran, he says that many muftis in Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and other Islamic countries declared IS out of Islam. So, how you justify your comments?
Okay, thank you very much. That is an excellent question. And, I'd like to begin with the kind of notion that we really need to separate empirical facts from normative facts. I'm not entirely sure there's anyone here who would argue that normatively the Islamic State represents Islam in any way. But empirically, as I mentioned in the presentation, they are using concepts that come from Islamic tradition and are used in various strands of Islam. And I think that is an empirical fact that cannot be overlooked, even though there are probably the vast majority of Muslims think that they are absolutely reprehensive. But in terms of how they kind of conceptualize themselves and their own ideology, jihadis are still a part of the jihadi tradition, even though they are a small fringe with absolute no normative support from outside the jihadi circles. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And what do you comment about the origin of ISIS?
Before I answer you, I would like very much that I want to see an action of my...
We have time for the audience.
It's very important.
Yeah.
Well, as we mentioned, the speaker, the origin of ISIS in three parallel ways. First of all, as I mentioned, is the policy, the international policy. The second thing is ISIS comes from Al-Qaeda, who was built in Afghanistan by CIA. And the third thing, that the regional government, like I would say, like Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, supported ISIS, let's say, in the beginning up to now. So, also, there is another factor, the slogan and the propaganda of ISIS being attracted to the youth, and then the youth also enter to the ISIS and then it become a power in the region.
And
can I just have a quick comment?
Yeah.
Regarding the comment you made about CIA being in a central role in the creation of Al-Qaeda, I personally believe, of course, there are plenty of proof that the CIA had a very central role in supporting the wider Afghan resistance and even some Arab border fighters. But at least in my own research, I've come across no piece of information which suggests that American funds were directly given to Al-Qaeda by American operatives. Whether the American funds went through the Pakistani intelligence towards Al-Qaeda, that's a good question. I don't have an answer to that. But I certainly disagree with the fact that CIA had a central role in the creation of Al-Qaeda.
The other point I would like to raise is the Islamic State. Where does this terrorist group get its support from? ISIS proclaimed Islamic order on territories they captured both in Iraq and Syria. The area they are now called contains economically vital oil sites. So some figures, 130 million barrels of oil has been sold, smuggled. And the trade exchange between ISIS and Turkey is about 900 million. So what do you think, Mr.
Well, certainly ISIS gets most of its funding trading oil, maybe trading water, organized crime, certain kinds of taxes, and In terms of oil trade, it has been particularly worrisome to see that so many oil wells have fallen under the IS control. But I'd say these kind of wealth that IS is accumulating, it needs to be put in a wider context. And as I mentioned, Islamic State is a hybrid organization, which means it also needs to govern. It cannot funnel all its money to political violence anymore. Of course, it's still a formidable threat in terms of being a guerrilla army and being a terrorist organization, but it needs to funnel a lot of resources into governing, and that's going to be a real issue in the future, because even though they are as rich as they are today, and I'm quite skeptical about numbers in press. They tend to be either biased, they either lowball or highball the estimate, and there's not that much reliable data. But you know, there are different estimates going from a couple of millions a day to a couple of millions per week to a couple of hundred millions per month. But the issue is, how effective can they use those resources? And this is a question that hasn't been answered yet. There are some early indications that they are trying to fund good governance in Raqqa and Mosul, but those are symbolic kind of flagships to the caliphate, if you will. And in terms of governance elsewhere in the region, it's an open question still. And they may be wealthy, but there are two issues. One is effectiveness in using those resources, and the other one is the insurgency resource curse. Will their riches attract opportunists and criminals who may, I'd say, hasten their downfall?
Thank you very much. If I may add to your analysis, actually, I've earlier tried to find out the participants or the members of ISIS. I tried to categorize them. What do they represent? What do they consist of? Well, and try please to help me if you disagree with me, or if you would like to add another category. And I reached up to 4 categories. The first of them, of course, are the believers, or the one who does that as an act of creed. And even though that there aren't any known recognized numbers of how many they are, but they still represent a clear minority. And then, as you have addressed before, there are the former regime members, the Ba'ath parties who also participate, and I believe that they also represent a moderate number as well. Adding to that, there are the people that you have already referred to as alienated or marginalized, and actually many of them are doing that because of economic reasons, partly, and also partly because they think that they are somehow will be able to reach a level of honor and dignity. And the fourth category that maybe no one has mentioned before are the people who are being forced to join IS. I mean, we hear a lot of news from Syria, we hear a lot of news from Iraq, that when they enter villages, they actually force people to let their children join or participate in IS. And if it's possible to move into the next step, I mean, the solutions, then maybe we could find a ground where we could actually absorb the last and third category in order to be able to start a process to maybe, if not eliminate, at least to weaken IS.
Yeah, I completely agree with the point. Of course, these 4 categories may change in accordance to the context. I think this particularly is applicable to the conflict region itself, Syria and parts of Syria and parts of Iraq. And definitely the 4th category, the forced ones, is something that we really as social scientists need to put more focus on, but collecting data is exceedingly difficult. But definitely, unfortunately, in terms of who gets the most attention, it's the first 2 categories, which kind of may lead us to exaggerate the problem. But in terms of violent state actors, it's quite common that the hardcore believers is a very, very small minority within any given organization, and those are the ones who make things tick. As long as they're pragmatic the movement might do quite as well, but if they're very ideologically heavy, as they tend to be with Al-Qaeda in Iraq and later the Islamic State, that brings about a plethora of problems for their project sustainability. And I think in that term, they might even shoot themselves in the foot before the international community can do anything about it. But this is hopeful thinking.
If I may share with you some numbers, actually,
yeah.
And it's, I'm referring to Chuck Hagel, the U.S. Defense Minister, and he was speaking about 100 Americans and approximately about 2,000 Europeans, actually, and there are estimations that there are about 12,000 foreign fighters, both in Iraq and Syria. And there's actually a point that I would like to highlight here. And, it's kind of a personal thing that I would like to share with you. Yesterday, I spent almost a whole day actually participating in the Swedish elections. I was part monitoring and also receiving votes and calculating. And it's not something new that we discovered. It's unfortunately something that's grown a lot, both in Europe and also in other regions in the world. And that's extremism. So we find some extremist parties, populist parties rising up in Europe, and the same thing could be also linked to these extremist organizations that are growing up in that region. So I would dare to say that it's kind of a global phenomenon that we are witnessing for the moment, unfortunately. I believe that's
Thank you.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I really agree. The case of foreign fighters that have joined the Islamic State, that's an interesting one, and that's something I followed for at least 2 years. Of course, when we look at the categories, they are a little bit different in terms of foreign fighters. They tend to be either believers, in a sense that they radicalized either in small groups or behind the keyboard, kind of got the ideology and very romanticized the idea of what jihad is, but then when they travel to a conflict zone, a chunk of them, and again, unfortunately there's no numbers, but when the kind of reality of being in a conflict zone hits you in the face, at least in the cases of the Islamic State, you tend to either become a forced foreign fighter, so you fight for the Islamic State because there is no way out, and this applies to countries with legislation banning foreign fighters from returning, and those cases where fighters have tried to leave their comrades and their group behind, and they get captured. They either get executed or they are forced to fight, and this is a phenomenon that we have individual anecdotes about, but unfortunately, again, getting information from the conflict zones is difficult. So we don't necessarily know how large this phenomenon is.
Yes, sir.
One point I would like also to mention, that when ISIS controlled part of the Syria in the north, actually nobody attacked them in the beginning. Nobody attacked ISIS in the beginning. On the other hand, or in the opposite, there are some countries who give them weapon, logistic, money, and supporting them in Syria, so they grow. So this is one of the points that it's really amazing. That then at the end they say, oh my God, that something is growing against us. So this is what we call it chess game. That they are some powers using ISIS against something. Let's say, put it clearly, use ISIS against President Assad. But at the end, now ISIS become a big danger. Thank you.
Yes, I totally agree with what Mr. Al-Jumaili just said. But at the same time, we've got to be honest with ourselves. We've got to be, I would like to say harsh on ourselves, but rather to criticize in order to improve, in order not to make mistakes that we have made already. I mean, it was agonizing. I would say also a shameful and bitter truth, which is the defeat of the Iraqi army in Mosul. It was a huge disaster. It wasn't supposed to happen. How did that happen? We need to look at that. And in order not we should look at it as external and internal facts, exogenous and indigenous. Well, of course, there are the exogenous facts. We have the problem in Syria, and we could have prevented that from happening in Iraq. We did have the instruments, but unfortunately, the previous government of Iraq, and I'm hoping really that the new government will be hopefully soon coming to the solutions of the problem. And I would not like to keep on talking on that subject, but
to talk about
yes,
first.
yes, figures. Yes, there is actually an approximation about yes.
Yeah, if you let me just one comment to ask.
Yes.
We three will talk in English accent, or you talk in an American accent, so I start with you. And ISIS has about 20,000 to 30,000 terrorists. And if you compare to countries in ground troop in Europe, it exceeds the number of those soldiers in this country. Like Hungary has only 10,000 soldiers. Austria has only 14, half of ISIS, and Norway has 9,000 ground troops. So how would you say that you are not considered of the action of ISIS in Europe?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
The question is, you said in your speech that you are not concerned of those sleeping cells in Europe.
Yes. Well, what I mentioned is we shouldn't be concerned of small cells in countries where the jihadi or the radical Islamist scene is just forming or has been formed. Finland is one of those cases. We don't have any reliable data of how many radicalized individuals there are. But in terms of radicalized individuals with connections to terrorist groups or individuals operating abroad, that's around 200. So I'm not that concerned yet, especially as we've seen that, well, radicalization to the point of undertaking political violence as a form of activism, that has only risen in the past 7 years. So we are still early on the phases, which doesn't mean it's not going to be a problem later on. But currently for countries like Finland, Switzerland, maybe Austria, domestic terrorism isn't that big of an issue, and if we exaggerate it, that might become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Of course, this is a completely different situation than what's going on in Germany, what's going on in France, what's going on in the UK. Their Islamist and jihadist scenes are more developed, and there is plenty of reason to suggest that there are agents or sleeper cells operating domestically, although those would be considered as foreign fighters. The rest might be volunteers for humanitarian causes or mercenaries. Or
if you compare, I'm Muslim. If you compare the amount of these to the Muslim living in Finland, it's the hugest among the percentage proportion. It's the hugest.
Ireland is bigger.
Yeah.
Well, I would like to add, first of all, I would like to add another figure, and we often love statistics actually. So we were speaking about the sleeping cells in Europe and how much damage they could actually make here. And I have a number here in front of me, and there are actually 415 casualties, deaths in Europe due to terrorist attacks since 2004, I believe, in the Medway bombings, the train bombings in Medway. So it's quite an insignificant number. I mean, the organized crime is
much bigger.
Committing more.
Traffic
exactly, and even traffic accidents. But of course, there is this growing fear. I mean, it's one of the reasons why also I just mentioned the spread or the growth of extremism. It could be also attributed to that as a fact. But still, I mean, most of the Muslim people here in Europe are productive. But I would also once again go back to the numbers that I just shared a moment ago, where I said that 100 fighters were from the United States, and approximately about 2,000 were from Europe. And there are a couple of reasons for that. And I would hope if you could add maybe a third reason. I mean, the first one is that the integration in the United States, well, first of all, is the assimilation in the United States is a lot easier, and it's possible to assimilate in the American society. Otherwise, if you do not assimilate, you could integrate into society. While in Europe, assimilation is not an option, almost. I hardly find some people who could actually assimilate in their societies. I mean, Muslims and foreigners. Well, and integration is still also very weak. And this makes this alienation, those young people who kind of grow up rootless in Europe, and they will try somehow to find this dignity and honor which this al-Baghdadi provides. So I believe that we should take a look at the integration process also in Europe and how it could actually absorb all the possible suspects or possible tendencies.
Just one small point. Just one small point. Just one sentence. You know, the threat to the society sometimes, not considering the numbers, maybe 4 people can destabilize the whole Finland if they are working in the secret way from the side. Just 4 people. I mean, even in England, there are just like there's a few people who actually make the horror in the London. So when we talk about 45 people from here, or 100 from the United States going to Syria, just imagine how many people backing them there, how many people supporting them. So the number sometimes is not really very, very important, but a few people can make very major danger.
Yeah, I agree completely. When we look at terrorism as a kind of method of political violence, you can do a lot of damage with quite a limited number of people. But I think in Finland the main issue still is prevention. And if we create a discourse in society which polarizes Muslims against non-Muslims, we're going to create a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think definitely radicalization and foreign fighting is something that Finnish authorities should really focus on and maybe kind of try to pass new kind of legislation to maybe prevent it. But if we exaggerate the problem or exaggerate the issue, there are going to be more people who feel that they cannot or integrate, they cannot assimilate, or even they feel alienated because they feel they are targeted. And that way I think we're making the problem worse instead of making it better. And Finland thankfully is still in the position where we can make the problem better instead of trying to keep it at a manageable level.
Let me have some comments from the audience. I would like to ask Lillandua to give his opinion about this.
Gentlemen, thank you for your informative information. The fact is, Islamic is all the time the same Islam. There is no traditional Islam, organizational Islam, or governmental Islam. It is the same. The fact we have seen ESS in different names, in different concepts through the history of Islam. Well, I'm trying to focus on what's the Britain and France as biggest player in the region, where they focused on establishing the states based on 3 elements: the fact the tribalism and nationalism and religion. Now we have a focus. We have the fact that the big conflict is the religion, because of it is the major and the common things on the region. hopefully we can resolve this problem, but then we come up to nationalism conflict, and after that the tribalism conflict. These nations and states have to live with conflicts. This is the fact. Because of there is lack of democracy, there is lack of state of law. As soon we get the state of law, then I think we succeed at that time against in our fight against the kind of conflicts which are based on religion and nationalism and the tribalism. So how do you see the future on based on three elements and with the same conflicts through the history? Thank you.
Majid Bahanpour, please.
I would like to put this to the panel that ISIS is operating in a landlocked area. Many foreign fighters is said to have gone, 12,000 fighters have gone to this area. It's very strange. Turkey is member of NATO. How to a country member of NATO, so many foreign fighters have been able to go there? Jordan is under American influence, Western influence. The countries surrounding the area, Iraqi government is completely under American influence. How could 12,000 fighters go to a landlocked area without the support of CIA or the people who supported this group, ISIS, from beginning? Second, the fairy tales that ISIS is selling oil, $2 million or $2 billion, I have heard even from Russian TV. The logistics of selling $2 billion oil is so huge. If in a landlocked area they can sell $2 billion oil in a couple of months, how is that possible? Thank you.
So we have Robert has a question or comment. That's the question.
Yeah, my name is Robert Eklund. I'm a political science student at the university here. I was thinking that it seems to be really hard to make a long-term policy now, even for the US. 1 year ago, they were ready to airstrike Syrian government. Now they may have to cooperate with the Syrian government. So I would like to ask about the Syrian dilemma. That has ISIS made it impossible for the moderate Syrian opposition to succeed by creating a common enemy for the neighboring governments who prior to ISIS' rise had different strategies on their relations to Syria? Thank you.
Next we have Mr. Marko Juntunen.
Yes, I'm Marko Juntunen from University of Tampere. Since 2009 I've made 3 field trips to Iraq, and I've talked to practically several dozens of ordinary Iraqis in cafes and homes. And I have not met one Iraqi who says that the state building project has not been a failure. They all say that this country has been fractured into sort of either ethnicized or sectarianized identities. And I think that this is an issue that needs to be tackled together with the strategies when we're trying to confront ISIS. Because how do we build a kind of sort of political front that is inclusive for all Iraqis? If sectarian discourses prevail and they sort of dominate the politics, so there will always be a basis for sort of larger disagreements and also for political projects that are kind of exclusive. Okay, so that's something that I wanted to ask. Another is the global aspect of this whole conflict. Today, several dozens of imams in Finland are gathered together to talk about the sectarianism, increasing sectarianism in Europe. How do you see that this kind of sort of the presence of sectarian language use among the Muslim communities, what does it mean for the future of Muslim communities in the Western diaspora? Because I think it is also very important. ISIS is utilizing very effectively sectarian language also with the diasporic community. Thank you.
Speak with the microphone. Okay. I'm Dr. Ammar Al-Kani, and I'm from the Committee of the Support of Free Syrian People in Finland. And well, in Syria, we do not consider ISIS as a religious armed movement. It's in fact, ISIS is the hidden armed arm of the Syrian regime. Now 4 million Syrians now are refugees outside Syria, and 10 million inside the country are without homes. And now we are talking about ISIS that are fighting. ISIS has rise in Iraq, and they were, before coming to Syria, were formed by the former secret service of Saddam Hussein armies. And all of us, we know that most of the leaders of ISIS, even that they are in Syria, they are about 40 former officers from the Saddam armies. And the hitting power of the ISIS is composed of 1,000 Russian soldiers, and they are the iron fist that ISIS is hitting them. And their commander, their army commander is Abu Omar. Is a Chechen Russian officer who was fighting in the conflict of Georgia in 2003.
Al-Shishani?
Yes. And we have here all the documentations that showing that Abu Omar al-Shishani and his officers, Russian officers, are forming the hitting armed fist. So he is with his generals in Syria. They have captured from the Syrian Revolution Army about a division from T-72 tanks before going to Mosul. It was about 1 month from going to Mosul, and they were named the David Division, Armed Division. They went from Idlib on the frontier of Turkey across about 900 kilometers to Mosul, across the Syrian land. Nobody has intervened and to stop them. How is possible a whole armed division of tanks to go there? And also, how it's possible that this ISIS, with their so-called young jihadists, can stop the Iraqi army in Mosul? They have attacked Mosul with 2,000 soldiers. In Mosul, they had 30,000 Iraqi soldiers armed, and they have captured war aeroplanes from the Mosul airport, military airport. They have captured $500 million from the central bank in Mosul. They were not protected. So can we talk about some kind of under-table international agreement or not? Okay. I mean, thank you. You have your time? Yes. Please, Mr.
Assalamu alaikum. I am Falah al-Musawi, a politic from Sweden. I have one question. As we know that all the countries surround Iraq must have an action deal with the solution of ICE problems. My question is, why USA and some of countries do not agree, Iran and Syria do not share with this operation? This is my question, if you are not. Thanks.
Thank you. I would like to ask how we have a representative from the Finnish police. I would like to ask you about the meeting of those terrorists who in the village. Could you please give us a Finnish
Janne Korhonen Helsingin poliisilaitoksen ennaltaestettä ryhmästä ja meidän ryhmän tehtävä on yrittää ennaltaestää.
Finish.
Could we have a translation?
Yeah, I can translate. I can translate.
Okay. Saan vaan puhua suomeksikin, käytän sen hyväksi. Eli ennaltaista toimintaryhmästä ja tarkoitus yrittää ennaltaestää radikalisoitumista ja muuta tällaista väkivaltaista toimintaa Helsingissä. Ja kysyttiin minulta, että kuinka mä näen tämän terrorismin Helsingissä tai Suomessa, niin tietysti mä en ole nyt suojelupoliisista, niin en pysty kommentoimaan heidän puolestaan, mutta ehkä oma näkökulma on se, että Suomessa riski on vielä aika pieni. Että Suomesta tehtäisiin ollut jonkinnäköinen terroristinen hyökkäys tai isku, mutta ainahan se on mahdollista. Ja mikä tärkeintä tässä on, että miten me saadaan ennaltaestettyä, se on se, että saadaan nämä eri uskonnolliset ryhmät keskustelemaan toistensa kanssa sekä myös sitten valtion ja kaupungin ja muiden yhteisöjen kanssa yhdessä, niin kuin tänä iltana on tällainen tapahtuma olemassa kaupungin talolla. Eli tärkeää on saada sellainen hyvä yhteistyö näihin yhteisöihin. Ja näiden yhteisöjen tehtävä on sitten ennalta estää näitä terroristi-iskuja tai muuta vastaavaa. Eli yhteisön pitää huolta niistä omista jäsenistään ja ystävistä ja tuttavista, että he eivät sitten lähde tälle radikalisoitumisen tielle. Se, mitä poliisi voi sitten tehdä, niin on yrittää ohjata näitä henkilöitä sitten sellaisen tahon puoleen, joka pystyy ehkä heitä auttamaan jollakin tavalla. Ehkä se voi olla joku tunnettu imaami tai sosiaaliviranomainen tai joku vastaava. Mutta tämä on vielä vähän kehitteillä Suomessa. Meillä ei ole vielä tapahtunut juuri mitään vastaavaa, niin nyt vasta harjoitellaan ja toivotaan, että mitään ei tapahdu. Kiitos. Saatteko vastauksen?
May I just ask you a question, please? In Sweden, we do have a law, we call it the FRA, I believe that you might have heard of that, which allows the intelligence services and police to monitor the telecommunication of certain suspects. Do you have a similar system here in Finland?
Seuranta. Siis puhelimien ja näitä sähköpostien onko sellaista?
No tietysti suojelupoliisi saattaa tehdä jonkinnäköistä tällaista, mutta paikallispoliisilla ei tällä hetkellä ainakaan suoranaisesti ole mitään vastaavaa. Se mitä paikallispoliisi tekee tai mitä minäkin teen, niin on ehkä lähinnä tämmöistä keskustelupalstojen seuraamista ja sitä kautta sitten tulee tietoon ehkä jotain. Mutta mitään tämmöisiä niin sähköpostien salaista lukemista tai puhelujen kuuntelua tai seurantaa, niin meillä ei kyllä ole. Mutta jos epäillään, että joku tämmöinen vakava rikos olisi tapahtumassa, olisi oikeasti epäily, että joku aikoo tehdä jonkinnäköisen terroristi-iskun, niin totta kai silloin tämmöisiä mahdollisuuksia käytetään hyväksi. Mutta ei täällä Suomessa niinku kuunnella ihmisten sähköposteja ja tekstiviestejä ja lueta niinku salaa. Se ei kuulu meidän toimintatapaan. Pitää olla joku peruste siihen. Kiitos.
Okay. Yeah, you have a question?
Well, the fact is, according to the Voice of Iraq, the news agency, which published on 15th of January, which mentioned there was a big group of terrorists have been, they have a very, very sensitive meeting held in Helsinki, where more than about 7 organizations who work in civil societies were participated on that meeting. And also, unfortunately, the ambassador left the seminar. The fact is also mentioned on the article that about 4 diplomatic staff of the embassy were participated on that meeting as a member of Ba'ath Party. And similar meetings been held in Denmark and before that in Norway. I don't know how it's the 45 fighters. It doesn't seem really a big threat to Finland, because when one guy can kill lots of people, how the 45, which they believe, and their mission killing people. And I'm feeling sorry about the Organization of Security in Finland. If they don't know about that kind of meeting, I can give you a lot of details and also the names. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The last question was Dr. Ala, and then we will have answers from the gentleman.
Yes, I'm Ala Hassan from the Iraq Economic Forum in Finland. My question is very brief. I mean, how many people should we accept to be killed in Finland so that we consider that there is really a threat or a risk? I mean, are we talking about 10, okay, we don't consider the risk, 50, 100? I mean, shall we compare this with the loss we get in the traffic, or using bicycles, or what? I mean, we have to, I mean, are we quantifying the risk in terms of people? For me, I think one is too much. A threat which will make one, a damage for one Finn is too much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please, Mr. Martin.
Okay. I would like to mention that the conflict in the Middle East very, very complicated, or very complicated. So when I answer in general about the whole question, look, I give you one example. There was a meeting in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia between about 11 countries. One of them, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, and United States, and Jordan, and so on. The aim of the conference or the meeting is how to fight ISIS. Whereas everybody knows that Saudi Arabia and Turkey are supporting ISIS. So see the conflict. Now, oil. Do you know how many people helping ISIS to smuggle oil out of the Iraq and Syria to support them? Do you know that ISIS is very well organized and they're using a very high technology in order controlling, you know, the area which they occupy? So what I'm trying to say is very, very complicated. The conflict between Sunni and Shia is a historical conflict, but we're trying to, you know, make it in some way or another not to be a war conflict, but it's not easy. I would say I'm talking about myself. I'm hoping that not just us as a Muslim, I'm hoping at the whole international community try to intervene in order to see the conflict in what's in reality. Because somebody asked, look, America is fighting Assad just 3 months ago, and now they want to make a dialogue with him. What's happening? So America trying, in the beginning, they supported ISIS in some way or another, indirectly, but now they want to destroy it. Please, we need a strategy. We need a vision to live in peace and harmony. We cannot live like this. We are talking here, okay, some people say, oh, the danger in Finland is not really real. But I'm telling you, if we don't move now, something will happen. We cannot avoid it. Thank you.
I will start from where he ended. How actual are these speculations that there are small threaten of these groups in Finland?
Well, as I mentioned earlier on, I mainly use open source data on my research, and I've found no indication of any domestic activist. Oh, it should be on.
It needs to be close to your mouth.
You can take this one instead.
Cheers. That's on, please. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier on, I rely on open source data, and I personally have not come across any piece of information that suggests that there are individuals in Finland who are sufficiently radicalized to try to perform political violence here. And what should be noted in the context of radical Islam or jihadist activity, it's normatively, meaning it's more acceptable to go fight in a conflict zone abroad than practice terrorism outside conflict zone. There aren't that many studies done regarding the matter, but all those studies that have been done, and Thomas Hegghammer has a fantastic piece on kind of target preference of radical Islamist or jihadist, and he suggests that it's 4 times as common to go fight abroad than it is to try to undertake a domestic plot. And within foreign fighters, only 1 in 9 foreign fighter returns with the desire to undertake a terrorist attack. So what we are seeing in Finland is now foreign fighting is becoming more common, or at least it's more in the public eye. But there are still some ways to go for a credible terrorist attack, and that is the, I think, official estimation of the FCIS, which is local sapling.
And it's about the questions.
The questions.
Many people ask you.
I think I want to focus on this 12,000 foreign fighters to Syria without the help of CIA. I think that is a very interesting question, but it has a problem that is very inherent. Things happen in the Middle East without America being behind it. I've seen no evidence suggesting that CIA plays any role in the foreign fighter phenomenon. If you want to really dig your teeth into what has been going on in Turkey, and Turkey has been the highway of foreign fighters to Syria, you can look at changes in Turkish foreign policy after the Arab Spring. They had this zero enemies policy for a long, long time, and then when things in Syria started to look bad, Turkey changed their foreign policy, saying Assad must go now, and they developed, well, they allowed foreign fighters to travel through Turkey and developed an infrastructure that was designed to facilitate foreign fighters into Syria. And that was how the phenomenon itself, or the highway of foreign fighters, was born. And of course, after that, Turkey, which hasn't been paying much attention, they lose control if they ever had it. The phenomenon became bigger. It started to have unforeseen consequences, more structural violence near the Syrian border, a couple of acts of political violence in Istanbul and elsewhere. And now they've only started to kind of stamp down on the foreign fighter phenomenon. But again, the damage is already done to an extent. There are a lot of foreign fighters that go through Turkey, and Turkey has a fantastic infrastructure in terms of traveling to Syria. You fly from Helsinki, it takes 3 hours, it costs about 200-300 euros. You can go there, be there in 3 hours, then you catch a connecting flight or take a bus to the border, and then you go over, because you're helped by various armed groups that operate rather openly in Turkey, or at least operated until very, very recently. And that's my answer to that question.
Thank you very much. Well, if we take a look back to what happened in Mosul, what could actually interpret or see that as an intelligence failure? Well, indeed it was. I mean, 3,000 fighters entered the city. It shouldn't have been a very difficult thing. It shouldn't have been a difficult thing in order to stop them. So intelligence services and police monitoring is actually a vital instrument, not only in Europe, I mean not only in the United States, but even in other parts of the world. But the major issue here, both, I wouldn't say both actually, what Europe managed to achieve is actually a high grade of tolerance, and this is the thing that we highly lack in the Middle East. So it's something that Mr. Mann just spoke about. I mean, the conflict between Shia and Sunni, it could be easily traced to the lack of tolerance. I mean, intolerance is a major problem. Tolerance doesn't mean, I mean, certainly all of you know what the meaning of tolerance. It doesn't mean that you would
accept the other for, I mean, it doesn't mean that you would agree with the other as he is, but you would accept him as he is. So, this is one of the things that hopefully we'll be speaking more a little bit further about the questions. There was a question risen whether there is a moderate Syrian opposition. Unfortunately, I did not see that. There are no evidence of such a movement, and that's quite unfortunate. And the problem is that they are either being squeezed by ISIS and the Syrian regime, and well, it's what from the evidence that I have seen, well, maybe for a certain time there might have been a cooperation between the Syrian regime and ISIS, but I don't think that this thing is continuing until the moment. They are fighting each other, and it is a matter of survival for them both, actually. And about the Chechenians, I mean, well, of course, the Chechenians were actually fighting Russians, and they kind of destroyed or demolished the whole city in order to try to eliminate those Chechenian fighters. So the Russians were also quite cruel in order to stop them. So it wouldn't be very surprising that some of them would actually join ISIS. They have used earlier these methods in Russia, and it's very probable.
With
yes,
with Russian army street fighting in Georgia, in the war in Georgia in 2003.
Well, there was another important question about the three categories that you named earlier. I would like to add a fourth one, and I would like also to add some complements to these, so in order for them to function. I mean, well, of course, you would need to have a state, a strong state, and that means that the state must be adjoined or accompanied by justice, or impartial. And, well, the rule of law, of course, we need the rule of law, but it must also apply to all of the citizens, all of the members, not having an elite which is excluded from the rule of law. And that's one of the biggest problems that we are facing, actually, in Iraq. But on the other hand, we would say we cannot have a real conciliation if we wouldn't try like to forgive and forget at the same time. So it is kind of a paradox, and it is kind of a trade-off that we would need to develop in the future in order to exceed this threshold. As for democracy, it's the same problem that lies there. It must be an inclusive democracy. So you cannot just have a kind of a democratic system that doesn't really function as a democratic regime or as a democratic governance. The fourth component that I would like to add, and that's the most important one of them actually, which I believe supports all of these three other categories, and that's the civil society. If you really cannot have a civil society, a genuine civil society, you will never be able to, first of all, have tolerance and also end these internal conflicts. So by ending the marginalization and alienation, you will exclude people from joining movements such as IS or the Islamic Army or Naqshbandiya Army or whatever movement. And even, I would say that I've been actually speaking about a lot of Sunni militant groups, where there are Shia militant groups as well.
Too much.
Yeah, actually, way too many. That's true indeed. We must also eliminate Qasaid. We must also see that the current militarization process that has went on in order to try to expel IS ends in a proper manner. There is a proposition now laid in order to establish a kind of a public guard or national guard. It is called a national guard, and it's very important to be an inclusive national guard. So if we manage to establish that national guard,
you mean it's inclusive? What do
you mean? Inclusive. You must include everyone in the Iraqi state. So all citizens, exactly. So all the Iraqi citizens must participate, or people from different ethnic, religious, or sectarian groups must be equally
participated or represented there. Well, further on, there is the economic issue. You cannot really solve this problem without having economic instruments. I mean, many people actually join IS because of economic deprivation. So people lack industries, production. You will not end this problem as well. The third and most important issue that needs to be managed as well, which unfortunately we have neglected to speak about, that's the media. What we have in Iraq today, not only in Iraq, I mean generally in the Islamic world, we have a very polarized media. We have either Sunni polarized media, we have either Shia polarized media, or we have also Kurdish nationalist media. And when you look at the Iraqi TV channel, I mean the governmental TV channel, they always actually kind of hail the government, and they always like endorse the government and its actions. So there has been absolutely no critics for the deeds that the government had done wrongly towards its people. And then, connected with the civil society, once again, we must have a dialogue. I mean, a religious dialogue. There is a huge necessity to revise texts. I mean, spiritual texts, religious texts, and scriptures. We need to reinterpret them. We need to, I wouldn't say we cannot rewrite them, unfortunately, but we need to revise them. So in order to understand them better. Otherwise, there will always be a group that will use these texts in order to justify their deeds. I'm
pretty sure that they are not going to be able to create it once more radically. Because ISIS has read the Islamic traditions, and they turned the neck of the contest and became radical.
Well, the Crusades in the medieval centuries went on because of spiritual texts, or because of an interpretation that the Pope at that time gave, and it was justifying all the injustice wars that went on, and even the 30-year-old sectarian war that went on in Europe. It was also justified by spiritual texts, but by the elimination. Or I wouldn't say elimination. Elimination is the wrong word, but rather the separation of the spiritual texts from the judicial law or judicial instruments that are being implemented and used. You could achieve.
You had so many.
I'm sorry if I have spoken away too long.
I have to ask Mr. Mann.
Actually, I'm going to go to another subject, another way, far from what he's saying. He's talking about how we solve the conflict there in the region. I would like to mention one very important part of that. The social security there in Sweden, in Finland, in England. Do you know how much the foreigner, the environment, using this social security actually against them? We have to consider, we have to tell the government of Finland, Sweden, England, they have to really consider carefully how they establish or manage the social security. There are so many people who get money from the government and they are sitting at home, sleeping, eating, drinking, doing nothing, no job, nothing, and then they have plenty of time. Maybe they are using this plenty of time of different things. This subject is very critical, and I think it's very important. This is one point. Another point I want to talk a lot. Another point, educational system, whether here or in our countries. We need to really go deep into it in order to see how we educate people, how we make vision to the youth. And also, as I said, the job and opportunities to work. Thus, we have also to look at it, besides what he's saying. Thank you very much.
I would like to ask about the weapon, how they get weapons and where they get them from. Some of the analysts say that the council of Syrian new government, they become a weapon seller to ISIS. So how would this really, how real is this?
Thank you for asking. That's quite an important question, but we need to expand this thought a little bit wider. I mean, the militarization in the region is a disastrous phenomenon that has been going on since the 60s, earlier, even before the 60s. I mean, in Iraq in 1967, 65% of the GDP actually was based on industry and oil. But then successfully, as the Iraqi army was growing further and further, we turned, and actually we happened to, unfortunately, in a very long and disastrous war, be fighting our neighbor for 8 years. I mean, in an injustice war, I would say, the GDP just went to 85% of oil incomes. I mean, so the industry just collapsed, and what was built further than that was the military industry in Iraq. So, part of the weapons that the ISIS or IS are using both in Iraq and Syria actually originate from previous weapons that we have already purchased before. Many other parts of weapons, new technologies that we hadn't seen before in the region, was actually provided by other states. I mean, Saudi Arabia was buying many weapons and handing out to al-Nusra or the so-called Free Syrian Army. And yeah, well, that goes by Turkey. Qatar was having the same role as well. The United States was also planning on funding and also buying weapons. And I mean, it's not that far ago when President Obama announced that he was giving 500 million to the moderate Syrian resistance. And one really wonders if there isn't a moderate Syrian resistance, where would this money go, really? One of these solutions as well is actually the demilitarization of the society. We have an enormously spread of weapons in Iraq. Not only in Iraq, I mean in the region generally, but I'm speaking about Iraq also specifically. There is an approximation that each two individuals in Iraq almost share a Kalashnikov. And that's really horrifying in tremendous scales. Thank you.
Oh yeah, just to answer your question more specifically in the context of the Islamic State. Not entirely convinced yet that there are actual states who are arming the Islamic State. It's a different actor from the Islamic Front and Jabhat al-Nusra. The Jabhat al-Nusra is being given guns by Saudi Arabia, by Turkey, by Qatar. But the Islamic State is a creature of its own. It was still in the early months very heavily affiliated with Al-Qaeda, and even Saudi Arabia was very reserved in its relationship or lack thereof with the Islamic State because of the aftermath of Al-Qaeda's campaign in Saudi Arabia from 2000 to 2006, I think. There was a wave of terrorist attacks, and after that Saudi Arabia has been more unwilling or less willing to provide funds or weapons for jihadis. It rode the jihadi tiger early in the late 80s and during the 90s. But after Al-Qaeda's brief introduction into Saudi Arabia is no longer one of the state sponsors of jihadism or global jihadism. Of course, a good question is, why isn't Saudi Arabia doing more to really cut down on the funding flow from rich Saudis through Kuwait to jihadi groups? But again, this is very different from state support. And this is important when it comes to guns because if we take away states as sponsors or as sources of weapons, there's not that much left. One place is war loot. They conquer areas, they get weapons through it. Another is the plethora of small arms that are already in the region, definitely in Lebanon, in Turkey's border areas, in Iraq. You can buy small weapons really, really cheaply. And as the conflict continues, the price of small weapons increases. And then you have local entrepreneurs either making guns or selling guns or facilitating flow of guns from suppliers to buyers. And of course there's the local gun industry, small smiths in places like Tripoli in Lebanon, but that kind of is small level stuff. But I think personally the main source of weapons in case of Syria is loot from the Syrian army, and in case of Iraq, it's loot from the Iraqi armed and security forces. And this goes to your point on Mosul, what happened in Mosul. It's the fact there were so many structural and motivational issues with the armed forces that they just decided to cut and run. Because they didn't have leaders, they weren't properly fed, they were fed up with the situation, and they decided to hightail it off to security. Most of them, or some of them, marched to their deaths, but they left behind a significant amount of weapons, Humvees, helicopters. IS is even captured, I think, a fighter right now. But most of the more sophisticated weapon systems, they just absolutely cannot use, or they're inoperable due to lack of maintenance for the past 10-15 years when Assad's regime or Iraq was unable to maintain those weapon systems.
Just one more point. Actually, I don't want to add because I don't want to repeat to what they are saying because they are correct. 2-3 factors. Do you know, there's one point mentioned. Do you know that Syrian regime, ISIS against Syrian regime, Syrian regime also supplying ISIS weapons? Why? Because when the conflict emerged between the ISIS and the National Council for the opposition, so the Syrian regime, oh God, that's good for us. If we get the conflict better and better, it's good for us. And I have met one of the Iraqi security person, and I asked him, what's happening? He said, do you know that the Syrian regime helped ISIS to go to Iraq because they want to get the fresh air from ISIS? So just imagine how this wasn't easy. The other factor which I want to finish, that ISIS now become very wealthy because of the oil. And there are so many countries also buying oil from them, secretly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, but you mentioned many countries during your speech, but there are very important players nobody mentioned. Israel helped the ISIS to buy bomb raids on Syria and treating their wounded in Israeli hospitals before rearming them to go back to Syria to escalate the carnage. So, who want to have a comment?
You know, we didn't talk about Israel, or nobody talked about Israel. I always ask people, politicians, why America and Europe start to confront ISIS when they are reaching Kurdistan, Erbil. So one of the politicians said that in Erbil, in Kurdistan, there are so many Israeli enterprises in Erbil. So Israel is also involving in this conflict. They are also using ISIS in one way or another. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Final remarks by Professor Andrew.
I would like to thank panelists very much. I have no remarks. It's been a long day, a long session, and I'm surprised that you have stayed so long here. I think it's really time to leave now and have a nice evening thinking about something much nicer than this ISIS in Iraq or Syria. But I'm sure the discussion will go on in the future, and many things will get clearer by time. Thank you very much.